Hi everyone, this is Venus Brown, and today I'll be doing a discussion of Handmaid's Tale. Season 5, Episode 9, Allegiance. I think we have a couple issues that are dealing with the title. This allegiance to the country you root from, America, which in this scenario has been mostly demolished and has been diminished down to two states and a little bit of war torn areas. It's mostly gone. Do you pledge allegiance to them? Who, since you have been back, you have tried to go through them to have something done about your daughter being in this other oppressive regime where they haven't managed to accomplish anything, at least in your eyes? Do you shift that allegiance and decide to give this new Bethlehem, this pseudo Gilead that's attempting to be a better version of Gilead, a try so that you can be with your daughter, so that maybe you might have a little bit of a better chance of getting your daughter out of that situation where she's going to be a child bride? And then you have this other reality. You have Serena stuck in a household against her will in order for her to be with her child. And do you go ahead and continue on with that fake allegiance to this family so that you can be with your child? Do you sacrifice that so that you can get your child out of there? You could even say that some of the stuff going on with Nick and Lawrence and their balance between trying to pacify these Gilead commanders versus trying to implement the changes that they are hoping for. Which allegiance do you really put your hat into? And then later on, when we see Nick and June together, does Nick put his allegiance with his current wife, stay there in Gilead? Does he put his allegiance with June, try to get the heck out? Does he put his allegiance with both of them and try to do this new Bethlehem thing? Which, even that, he's got to convince June to even be willing to do it. So I do see all kinds of ways that allegiance would be applicable to this episode. And then, of course, we have the final scene where we really see where this allegiance lies. And that's another area. You have Canada, who has been infiltrated by all these American refugees. And at this point, it's almost a decade after this began, and they're getting upset and they're getting frustrated. Not all of them, but some of them, enough of them to really start really having some vitriolic protests that are getting quite unpleasant. Do they keep their allegiance to Canada, and Canada being its own isolated place, and push all these refugees out? Or do they err on the side of being allegiant to Canada but welcoming these refugees in, or at least being okay with them being there? So, yeah, there's definitely several different ideas there that can kind of muddle around with that idea of allegiance and having allegiance with a certain person or area or group or idea. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you want more content, click subscribe. If you click that little bell and click all, then you'll get more content notifications. We start the episode and Serena is dealing with Mrs. Wheeler being her annoying self, thinking that she's this great mother and that Serena's a terrible mother. Serena is a terrible person, but a terrible mother, there's nothing to indicate that. And she tells Serena that she needs to start pumping so that the baby doesn't have to breastfeed all the time. The baby was bottle fed the whole time she was in the detention center, which was at least a month, and that he'll be used to it. And Serena explains that I think if we continue to breastfeed him solely, that will be less confusing for him. And Mrs. Wheeler has the audacity to say, "Oh, my smart boy isn't going to be confused." I'm like, this is not your boy. Even if you think you have some right to freaking take care of this kid because you think that Serena is not a fit mother, it is not your boy. It is not your kid. Yeah, I thought that comment was very fucking inappropriate, and I was glad to see that Serena held her temper and didn't friggin' deck that woman because she definitely deserved it. Because that was definitely way out of line. And I think Serena starts to go along with part of her plans to start plotting against these people and probably more likely to try to get away. She tells Mrs. Wheeler that it would really be a good idea since the grand opening is coming up and she was the person that came up with this idea and she has this brand new baby. She's like the inspiration for this center, that maybe they should have her and her child come to greet guests as they're coming in. Mrs. Wheeler, she comes up with these excuses that you're a guest and you need to rest and take care of yourself and all this shit, but it's all just an excuse to keep her from being around other people, to keep her in their household, to keep her isolated, and keep her from being able to talk to anybody. So that doesn't end up working out. Serena gives in when it comes to the pumping and says she'll go ahead and pump. And she's already told by Mrs. Wheeler that no, she's not going to be part of the grand opening. All for bullshit excuses. We have at one point this scenario where Aunt Lydia is talking to Lawrence, telling him that this is the right thing to do, and Mrs. Putnam walks in, and we come to find out that this is an attempt at proposing to Mrs. Putnam that Lawrence and her get married. But it's like the worst proposal ever. Lawrence does not get to the point without Lydia prompting. Um, the whole scenario was so funny and so ridiculous. And I think there was even one point where Naomi Putnam was like, is this a proposal? Like, this is such an insane proposal. Lawrence isn't even doing the asking. He said something like, you could come and live here and bring along your kid. Doesn't tell her that he wants to get married. Aunt Lydia has to explain that he's suggesting they get married. And eventually Naomi's like, he had my husband shot in front of me. And Aunt Lydia like turns it around on her and is like, yes, and he was willing to look over that. And I was like, oh, that's priceless, because there is some complacency involved in the actions of her husband. Yes, she knows what kind of horrible person he is, and she probably can't do a whole heck of a lot to change his actions and what he was doing, but I think she knows that the commanders of Gilead could really look at her situation, being married to this man and him getting shot for breaking Gilead laws, as her having some kind of fault. I mean, they fault people for far less than that, which I think is why she also begs not to be sent to the colonies. So, yeah, Aunt Lydia turned that around on her very well. Just priceless. Just a priceless scenario. That whole proposal was just so trash and awkward and uncomfortable. But it looks like eventually she gave in and decided to go ahead and go along with it. When Lawrence and Aunt Lydia first suggested that Naomi can't be this single mom with a kid living in that house, she took it as, oh, yeah, it's only two of us. We'll need a much smaller place. Maybe I could be moved to like Brooklyn or some other area in one of their condos or something. And Lawrence is like, we're not your realtor. Like, She also commented that she actually gets a choice, and he's like, "Oh, that's so hurtful." I was like, "Oh my God." There have been so many lines in these past few episodes that are just beautifully given. Really, really wonderful lines. Okay, so back to Serena. She is looking in on Mr. Wheeler, appears that she is up to something, and it gives all those vibes of back when June was trying to convince Commander Waterford to do something that she was hoping for, which is exactly what's happening. Serena goes in there and she makes her second attempt at a grand proposal, this time to Mr. Wheeler, above Mrs. Wheeler's head after she had already said no. This center was her idea, that she was sent there for this reason, and that it would be a great idea for her to come to the center for the grand opening with her child to greet guests as she's coming in. And he's like, yeah, that's a great pitch. And he tells her that he'll consider it. Sometimes I can't really make heads or tails of Mr. Wheeler. Like, I don't really know what to think of him sometimes, but he had some interesting lines, and even his lines, I don't always know exactly what to think of. But when she's talking to him, he just makes these like one word comments to the point. Like when she comes in, he asks if she's gonna shoot him. And while he does eventually get around to saying that he will consider her offer, just like these comments that he makes were kind of funny, but they were kind of like left field. I don't know if it's like the kind of person he's trying to present or what, but some of the comments I found a little off the wall, but still amusing. We get to the scenario where June and Luke are actually being clued in on everything that's going on and being told that yes, they are going to do a raid to try to get these girls out of this wives' school. They introduce them to this soldier who is going to be coming in and working on this. And of course, they give his name, which is not always the best sign when you give somebody who you know you're not going to see very long a name and introduce them, start giving them facts about their life and stuff, tends to mean that they're going to die. So that's just another scenario where it's like, oh, this doesn't look like things are going to go well. He shows them a picture of his daughter, says he's going to go in, get her daughter out, and come back so that he can be with his own child. And we do find out later on that that's not what happens. The best laid plans. But Tuello tells them that they're going to be watching this live feed, that he will send them information later on. And June is like, oh, no, no, no. We need to be there. We need to be watching this. And Tuello's like, no. I mean, in the first place, she doesn't have clearance. There might be some permission that they can get for some scenario like that, but usually it would be like, you don't have clearance, and this is a classified project that nobody should know about. But June insists, we gave you the data that helped you to find this. Like, I need to be there. I don't have a big argument with her being there, honestly. She's going to see that things are going to go wrong and that, you know, the best laid plans don't always happen the way that you want them to. She would have found that out either way. It would have just been a little later. I don't see June in this scenario as being in a position where she's going to get a lot of classified information that she shouldn't have. But like, I can't make that kind of decision, but I think Tuello is high up enough that he can make that kind of decision. So he goes ahead and he lets them watch. And we get to see imagery of Hannah in her wives' school. It appears to be nighttime, and she is going to this little like lace tent that they have them sleeping in, which when I saw that on the promo, I was like, oh God, please tell me that's not like some kind of setup that they're having to try to have them learn how to do freaking ceremonies and shit like that, because that's right where my mind went. But that doesn't appear to be what it is. And Hannah is looking through this book, which has only pictures, it doesn't have any words. So, no, it doesn't go against Gilead law. It allows them to learn a little bit of these biblical passages that they want them to learn, but doesn't allow them to read or write. But then she pulls out a pencil. And you're like, ooh, that is against Gilead law. I think the only females that end up being allowed to read or write are the ants. And she pulls out this pencil. She's definitely not an ant, at least not at that point. So, girl got a pencil. Where'd she get a pencil? How'd she get a pencil? What's she doing with her pencil? And she goes ahead and she writes her name. For a 12-year-old, for us, that would seem like very underdeveloped, but she's in a position where she hasn't been allowed to read or write, so she hasn't been learning proper handwriting, and frankly, my handwriting is way worse than that, so I have horrible handwriting. And I'm a full-grown adult and have been through school back when they were still teaching handwriting. It's not pretty. She writes her name, her real name, Hannah, not the name that they've been making her go by, Agnes. So then that starts making you think, she obviously knows her name. A lot of people are like, well, Hannah didn't recognize June last time she saw her. She didn't even remember her. How's she going to even deal with any of this? She's not going to know who June is or who her father is. I don't buy it. At the point that she saw June, when it wasn't actually a really oppressive situation, when June was pregnant with Nicole and was getting ready to give birth, she was old enough that she should be able to retain that. Even in a scenario where she's really not getting any more information about June proceeding with this completely different life, she should still have some memory of that situation. And she was fairly intellectual at that time to figure out what was going on, to question why her mom didn't come for her, to understand that her mom was having a baby and that this wasn't necessarily of her own free will. Plus, the scenario that happened later when she was in that glass cage and was acting very afraid, I do not for 1 second think that it was that she didn't recognize June. I think she was being brainwashed to believe that June was this awful, horrible person. And we don't get to have any freaking clue what kind of stuff that her Gilead parents are telling her. We don't have a clue what the ants are telling her, what any of the people in this regime are telling this girl. I'm imagining they're telling her all kinds of horrible crap to make her believe that June is this awful person, or that she is going to be treated very, very badly because of June. And that might make her afraid of June. I thought she was afraid because of the crap that people have been telling her. And probably because of the scenario she was in. They had her in a freaking glass cage. No matter what they've been telling her about June, that's a scary scenario anyway. She's been brought up as a commander's daughter with all this privilege. She's well taken care of. But now she's been carted off to this other place, put in a glass cage, and then had her real mother carted in front of her, who people have probably been talking some horrific shit about, may have been giving her threats. And I think that's what set her off. So, yes, June talks herself about, even as an adult, how as time goes by, her memories fade and those pictures blur, and she forgets more and more about who they are and what they look like and what they sound like and all of that, but not completely. And I don't believe that Hannah would have forgotten completely. So now, what about her dad? I don't know. That I think will be harder for her to retain. So there's no way to know for sure what her impressions are of her dad, if she can still hold on to any picture of him or anything like that. I don't know. We go back to the scenes of June and Luke with this military action, and they're being allowed into the room where they can see the footage of what is happening. And they have those 3 planes that are going to be going in, infiltrating the Gilead airspace. and then flying to Colorado. And just so you understand, Colorado is around the middle of the country. They have to actually fly pretty far to get all the way to Colorado in order to accomplish this. And Gilead's going to be watching. Somebody had said something which I didn't get wind of. I didn't understand when I watched the last episode, that at the very end of the episode, Hannah had looked up and you heard an airplane flying overhead. And I would have taken that as this scenario that's going on, where they are in the process of this military action and getting ready to land and infiltrate this facility. But after hearing this situation again, and after going through the whole episode and seeing how things end up, I am more apt to believe that that may have been the day before, and she was actually hearing that that may have been Gilead actually moving their anti-aircraft munitions or something to that effect, which would line up with why this thing went bad, how Gilead knew ahead of time and took these people out so easily. So they're watching as these planes are getting ready to cross the border, and red targets and alarms going off all over the place, and Tuella's telling them to get them out of here, and you know that nothing good is happening. The red targets and no communication and alarms means that something went terribly wrong. It could mean that for some reason communication was blocked, but in this scenario, we do find out a little while later that no, all three aircraft were hit and that everybody died, gone from the earth forever. After all the information that we have, after the scenes that we see with the Gilead commanders, discussing how Russia and China and North Korea and all of them feel about them sticking it to America, about the seeming appearance that they already knew what was going to happen and could anticipate it ahead of time, put these planes out of commission right away, and the fact that this video was mysteriously sent to Luke and they were able to see this image of Hannah, which gave the American government the intel that they needed to find this school. That the footage of Hannah definitely looked like she stopped and saw somebody recording and seemed to recognize the person. Then that makes me wonder, who was it that recorded this video? And was it planted just so that they could do this? They knew that this was the action that was going to be taken. And they got their mark and they knew where to friggin' put the anti-aircraft missiles and take these people out. What part does Lawrence really have in this? Is it Lawrence that did this? Is it Nick that did it? Is it Mackenzie that did it? Is it somebody else that did it? Who did it? How did it happen? How did Gilead find out exactly what was going on just in time? And I don't know. I don't want to believe that Lawrence or Nick sent it and that they knew that this was going to happen. But I suspect that whoever sent it knew that America might retaliate in such a way, and that there is a possibility, because of this relationship that Lawrence has, he seems to have this control over these people. I still think some of it is because of the dirt that he has on certain commanders from Aunt Lydia, but he also has to appease these people. And if they know certain things, but they don't know other things, and he has to keep them on his side in order to keep getting the things that he wants put in place, in order to keep them on his side, and in order to keep him from getting freaking taken out, because you know that's always a risk, that he may have intentionally given them some information or made it look like he had something to do with this in order to appease these commanders, keep them off his back, and keep them on his side. I hope he wasn't directly involved. I hope it was an after the fact. It looks like I had something to do with this. I wasn't the precipitous of it starting. I hope that, but there's no guarantee. Even with Nick, I think Nick is squarely on the side of June and wants to keep June alive and wants to keep Hannah alive. It's hard to say with Lawrence. Sometimes he's hard to read. We're definitely seeing a lot of his trying to use Bethlehem and these other changes he's making as some kind of amends for the horrible shit that he's done, thinking that this might be a way to make things better after a given amount of time, that things might be good enough that they could spread these kind of changes throughout Gilead and make up for some of the horrific shit that he has caused. At the same time, his wife comes up into the conversation. I don't remember if it was him that brought it up initially or June, but he's like, this is something that I have to do, because after my wife died, I made this promise. But she does end up telling him not only did his wife hate him so much that she couldn't live with it, she also tells him that she watched her die and that she did absolutely nothing about it. And honestly, when it comes down to it, I kind of don't blame her because I feel like Eleanor was already so tormented. Gilead was not going to help her. I don't think she could live with herself, even in Canada, with all of the horrific shit that she knows that her husband has done. So I do feel like June allowing her to die and not doing anything to stop it put Eleanor in a situation where hopefully that torment can finally stop, because she won't be alive to continue going through this. But when Lawrence says that he thought that she had something to do with it, he pauses for a little while, but then he does come back and say, but I still think that Eleanor would want me to do something to help Hannah. In the end, it really was because of him that she ended up killing herself. Yeah, the forced rape ceremony, I think, put her over the edge, but the reality that he's the one that plotted this stuff, that he's the one that made this happen. He put in this economic system, but didn't find a way to keep these horrific rapes from happening, these murders from happening, all this other horrific shit that was going on in Gilead. And you could see their relationship, that they both knew that there were massive problems like this going on for a long time before June was ever in the picture. I think Gilead not giving them the resources for her to get proper mental health treatment also contributed greatly to it. But this eating at her the whole time, that her husband caused this system, that her husband made this happen, and that all this horrific stuff is happening and he hasn't stopped it. That, I think, was eating at her. Add that kind of stressful weight onto somebody who already has mental health challenges, and it just makes it that much worse. It makes it that much harder. And then you add Gilead being freaking ridiculous with mental health issues and other disabilities and shit. Like, what hope do they freaking have? What hope do they have? Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some things that I've been kind of mulling around in my head when it comes to Lawrence's guilt, his ideas of New Bethlehem, and other steps that he wants to take in order to make Bethlehem better. What I think about those ideas and the possibility of had he done things differently. He had said that if he would have known how things were going to go, he never would have freaking come up with Gilead at all. He would have just let humanity die. But I don't think using religious zealots is the only way that he could have implemented something that might have worked. There were always things that I saw about what Gilead was doing that I thought, oh, well, if you did it this way instead and made it so that it was a choice, so that people knew that they could choose to do certain things, you might have been more likely to have people actually agree to do certain things in order to make the environment better. in order to make pregnancies more likely to come about, in order to make pregnancies more healthy, in order for these children to actually not be stillborn or not be deformed. But taking away everyone's rights to make those decisions at all, to me, is the biggest problem with Gilead. But in both this episode and the last episode, I definitely feel like Lawrence has gotten to a point where his guilt is just eating him alive. I don't think he's going to last much longer. The things that June has been telling him, the things that he can see just for himself, and that memory of his wife, what his wife went through, and the fact that she killed herself because of the things that he did. I think it's making him face his guilt so much that I don't think he can deal with it much longer. And I see New Bethlehem and many of the other steps he's trying to make as grasping at straws, trying to make something better of a horrific situation. But I see those steps as little band-aids trying to cover up a catastrophic wound. And little band-aids aren't going to help enough. If you remember back when June was proposing to kill Fred, Lawrence made the comment to June that this isn't going to be enough. It isn't going to be enough for you. And I think the same thing kind of applies in this situation. New Bethlehem isn't going to be enough. Whatever changes he is able to make to put band-aids on Gilead, I don't think are going to be enough for him. And inevitably, I think he will take his own life. Either that or somebody else is going to take him out. Because he is playing a very dangerous game. He has been playing a very dangerous game all along. So I don't see him staying in this position for very long. And I suspect either somebody else will take him out legally according to Gilead law or through assassination, or he'll end up killing himself because he can't deal with it anymore, and the little band-aids he's using are just not going to be enough. But I also wanted to look at some of the plans that Lawrence has laid out for us to see. The idea of taking all these steps and eventually it slowly moving forward to a better Gilead that maybe isn't so freaking oppressive. The idea that he was trying to implement a system to help the birth rates go back up and to keep humanity from dying, to help the environment not kill everybody off either. And so those are all novel ideas. But his idea to use religious zealots in order to put it in place, to me, he should have been smart enough and known enough of history to know that that was going to go horribly wrong. And maybe he did. Maybe that's why Serena said that Lawrence has been trying to propose New Bethlehem all along. Maybe he knew that history has shown us when you put an entire regime of religious zealots in place, you get horrific crimes against humanity, massively oppressive regime that most people aren't going to want to have on their conscience. And most of these oppressive religious regimes end up becoming so oppressive and horrible, the people just can't deal with it. And even once those regimes get toppled and somebody else takes them over and maybe they become democratic or maybe they become a democratic republic or something like that, a lot of times that doesn't last very long. The stuff collapses. People end up dying or getting assassinated or voted out. The vacuum is filled with some horrific person that ends up turning the regime back to the same old crap that it was doing or worse. For me, he should have known that. He should have known that. Maybe he did. Maybe that's what New Bethlehem and all these other fixes are. Then that gets me wondering, was there some other way to implement something like this on such a massive scale? If your environment is that bad and your birth rates are dropping that precipitously and you have that few live, healthy babies being born, then you're in a situation where most likely you are going to just let it go. The human race will just die off, and trying to change that enough to keep it from going that way would take massive changes that need to happen fairly quickly. And changes like that, for the most part, don't happen quickly. They take years, years. So then I thought, well, like the stuff he's doing with New Bethlehem, we've seen things like that. We've seen little communities pop up where they try to make it healthy and environmentally friendly and, this nicer, healthier version of a community where people can go in. They tend to be a little more expensive than most poor middle class or impoverished people can afford. They tend to be really geared at those privileged people that can afford something like that and that are actually willing to look at something like that as a good change to make in their lives. And I don't think we have enough of those people. But who's to say that given that situation, that the environment is that bad and maybe the masses are actually willing to acknowledge it and see it? Because right now our environment is not good, yet there are a lot of people that are unwilling to really look at just how bad it is. There's a lot of people that are still in denial that global warming is even a thing. There's a lot of people that think that even if it is a thing, that there's nothing that they can do about it. Let's say you have, instead of a society that's unwilling to acknowledge or accept this, let's say you have a society where it's just staring them so much in the face that they can't deny it anymore, that they have to acknowledge it, that they feel like they have to start doing something substantial about it. And the birth rates are going down so much, and so many people are either not giving birth or not getting pregnant or having babies that are deformed or stillborn or die soon after they are born, that they feel like they have to do something about it. In that scenario, might you be able to try to implement ideas like New Bethlehem? Get rid of all the oppressive forced rapes and forced marriages of Gilead and start making it people's choices. Give them their autonomy to make these decisions themselves. Allow them to choose to come to a community like this, to start building more communities like this, to start passing laws that would work for a community like this. Could you get enough people and enough change to make that system start to have the effects that Lawrence wanted it to have, where the birth rates do start going back up and where the environment does get a little bit more cleaned up so that we don't freaking kill our earth? I don't know. I think it would go too slow and it wouldn't be able to happen precipitously enough to make those changes in any kind of worthwhile way, but I could be wrong. And even Gilead, it's probably been almost 10 years, and they're just now saying, oh, look, the birth rates are better, and the environment's better, what, in our area, but nowhere else. Like, so is this really a plan for humanity? No, it's just a plan for Gilead and nowhere else. It's a plan that's oppressive, that forces this, and is that really the kind of life that we want to have? So yeah, this is just stuff that I've been entertaining, thinking through in my head. If there is some other way, I do feel like coming up with ideas like New Bethlehem for people that are willing to make those kind of changes, you're still going to face the problem of this is going to be a privileged situation. The privileged would be able to come to places like this, and the poor and underprivileged are a lot less likely to be able to even have access to these kind of places. So then you're talking about genocide of anybody that doesn't fit this kind of thinking or the ability to be able to even access these kind of places and these kind of resources. Lawrence calls June. It's not the time. Like, she is freaking pissed. She's upset. And after that phone call is over, it just sends June into a rage where she goes and beats the shit out of her flower garden. While June seems to be kind of handling things mental health wise a little better than she was, she's still a traumatized person who is still slowly trying to work her way through that situation. And so anything like this could really set her off. So her going into this kind of rage is definitely not surprising. June goes to see Tuello, reiterate the situation that they're in, and explain that we need to keep going. We can't just drop this and stop. We have to keep going. So what's next? And there were a couple things I think that Tuello proposed. First, that June has this platform. She has done some amazing things that people know about. And she could use that as a platform to kind of make things happen. She has some power in this aspect to really get her voice out there. But June rightfully says that she's not ready to do something like that. I mean, the situation in Canada right now seems to be at a boil. The environment right now is explosive, and her family is not safe. To echo those kind of messages right now could be very dangerous for her and for them. The other option that Tuello brings up, because June's already said she's done with friggin' Lawrence, so he suggests Nick. Because as we know, he had talked to Nick before and Nick turned him down at that time. But he knows that Nick is still malleable and he knows that Nick still gives a shit about June. And so that maybe there is some way that they could convince him to work with them and eventually get his ass out of Gilead and be protected, have immunity. So they set up this meeting and we get to see Nick in this position that looks a lot like when we first started seeing Nick in the series. He's up on this perch up on the top of the set of steps, and June goes to talk to him and she's like, why the hell did you turn down Mark's proposal? And Nick gives these excuses that he's got a family, that he can't just drop everything and go. And June's like, are you fucking serious? I've got a family too. I have your freaking daughter and Luke. We can't just drop everything and go either. And she starts commenting about Rose and you're going to feel when you start having to get a handmaid and pin her down and rape her every month. And then he tells her that Rose is pregnant, and you see that realization of what he is saying. My thought was, even with that, what happens when that kid grows up? And especially if that kid is a female. And Nick explains that things are changing in Gilead. It's getting better. To me, it's still band aids. And those girls are still in every bit as much danger. And even the guys are in danger. But he explains again that they're not going to be able to see each other for a while, that it's going to be hard to see each other. And I think somebody said that this was actually their goodbye. So is this like a real goodbye forever? I don't know, but it's like one of many. So we'll see in the future. But while they're talking, June kind of comments that it's a mess, and Nick responds that the whole world is a mess. And then she makes the comment that sometimes I really just wish the world would go away just for a little bit. And I so feel her on that. Sometimes really just let everything go away for a while. Just it would just stop and go away. But they definitely set up that they both need safety for their family, that they're not going to be able to see each other for a while. And as Nick is leaving, June comments to him that a child looks to their father for them to set an example. So I think that we can probably look forward to seeing something with that later. What kind of example is Nick going to set for his child in the future? I feel like that was a little bit of a call to action from June. You have some power here. You have the ability to set an example. What are you going to do to set an example for your child in the future? Oh, and then we see this meet up with a bunch of the commanders and the wives over, I think, at Lawrence's house. Looks like he's getting ready to present his proposal, along with having the wives there in another room because Rose is pregnant. They're all harping on her belly. Guys are in the back room discussing their latest events with bombing the 3 planes that tried to invade their airspace. Aunt Lydia is also there because after the guys have their little meeting, they come out there so that Lawrence can present his new proposal to Naomi Putnam, which that greeting was almost as awkward as the proposal itself, but okay, you're gonna do what you gotta do. So I'm gonna start out with the section in the back room with the guys. They're talking about this bombing that they just did successfully, which clues us in that somebody in this room most likely is the cause of this bombing. I am very concerned that that recording may have been a plant, or one of the people that knew about the recording gave information to other people that contributed to them figuring out that the American military was going to engage in this activity and then bombing their planes. But I know that both Nick and Lawrence are playing this dangerous game where they're trying to accomplish these changes. They're trying to make things better, but they also have to appease these commanders who have certain expectations. One of their expectations is successful military might and attacking people that they see as being against Gilead, like June. So my thoughts are on 2 levels. That one, it could be whoever recorded that video intentionally planted it, gave it to Luke because they knew that it would result in this type of action, and then engaged in moving their anti-aircraft system and bombing the planes. Or the person that sent and recorded the video was not trying to plant it, did it out of good intentions to give them information, but when push comes to shove and these commanders are asking for appeasement, sometimes they put themselves in bad positions just to keep the commanders off their back. That maybe initially it was sent out of good intentions and the wrong person got a hold of the information, and somebody that knew about the video decided that in order to keep these commanders off his back, he would feed them some information so that they would feel good about the results. And right now, we don't really have a way to know. It's just very upsetting that it does look like they definitely did know what was going on. And by they, I mean Lawrence and Nick, semi good guys that we know of that are in Gilead plotting this stuff. They knew this information got out to the wrong people, or they may have intentionally given it to the wrong people to get them off their back. This bombing happened because of it, and they were bragging it up. Now, there is this slight possibility that somehow somebody else got a hold of the information, that they didn't plant it or they didn't know that they had the information, but once they found out that they figured this out, they tried to align themselves so that it looked like they had something to do with it, just again so they could keep these commanders off their back. They could make them look good to the commanders. I don't know, it doesn't look good. It makes it look like somebody that we felt was kind of on June's side and on Mayday's side is actually against them. I think we've known for a while that Nick and Lawrence both sometimes play two ends against the middle because they kind of have to. They're only getting into the positions that they are by working with these commanders, appeasing them, giving them what they want, and making themselves look good. But they're also only making these changes in Gilead because they're in this position, because they're in these positions of power and connection and stuff like that, so that they can make changes like this under certain people's noses, hopefully without getting caught, hopefully so they don't get killed. And we don't know if there on that side or if they are on the other side. Is Lawrence just playing a game here? Or is Lawrence legitimately sincere that he wants to improve Gilead and that he doesn't want to harm these other people? I'm not sure. I think he does want to improve Gilead, but I think he's more willing to do dastardly stuff in order to keep commanders on his side and to keep commanders from wanting to kill him. Nick, I don't understand why he's not in a higher position. Honestly, he has led several military missions. Like, he is a major part of the reason that Gilead is able to continue on due to their military might and everything. And that is bad for him. Like, he's guilty of killing a lot of innocent people. But it also puts him in a position where they should look highly upon him. I think he is sort of in a high position, but it's more like, I'm this up and coming commander and I'm under Lawrence's tutelage, basically. And before, what was he? Under Fred Waterford's tutelage. And then for a little while, when he was an eye, he was under that other commander's tutelage. Like, these people are guiding him and helping to mold him into whatever kind of person they want him to be. And the various people that have been in that position have been, guiding him in different ways, some good and some bad. Either way, Nick seems to do things that are good for June, for getting information about June's daughter to June, trying to protect June in whatever way he can, in whatever way he thinks he can. But I don't think he has any loyalty to anybody else, really. So he's just trying to keep his job, keep his head and neck intact, continue to get to these higher up positions so that he can have more connections to help June. Basically, I don't see him doing a lot of good things outside of what he does for June. Though I think he probably has a mentality that goes the way that June feels, in a way, which is probably why he ended up hooking up with Rose. They seem to have some kind of connection, and is why they ended up getting married. And Rose definitely seems to know things about Nick that most Galadians would not appreciate. And she seems okay with it, although I sense a tinge of maybe jealousy or something to that effect. But I can't tell if he has any loyalty beyond June. When it comes to any side, it feels like it's more opportunistic and trying to save his neck. Either way, they're in this meeting, we hear this stuff, so we get to find out that people knew stuff, found out about the Americans because of that, and bombed them. Legally, they would have the legal right because the Americans are invading their airspace without proper permission. It sucks, but it's a reality. And like I said, Colorado is in the middle of the nation. They have to make a pretty lengthy flight all the way from the Canada border to Colorado just to get over there without being shot down. And because somebody had the information, they were able to move their anti-aircraft systems in order to have it ideally situated to shoot them down right away. Even if they hadn't had that, there's still the chance that their planes could have been caught in their airspace and something could have been done, that they could have been shot out of the sky anyway. The thought that they would make it all the way to Colorado, infiltrate this school, pull children out and get out of there safely, to me was not realistic. Especially 3 matching planes that are not inconspicuous going in their airspace at the same time. And they're bragging about this, that Russia, China, North Korea were bragging that they stuck it to the Americans. And I'm like, seriously? You already stuck it to the Americans. You completely overturned their freaking government. You took over their nation. And all they have left is Alaska and Hawaii and a little bit of war-torn fringes around some of the outside edge states. You stuck it to America a long time ago. But, you want to brag about this stuff, okay. But Lawrence has been talking about wanting to get in with NATO. I don't know. Like, are they going to be willing to partner up with a country that is engaging in activities like this? I guess they could easily just say this was illegal retaliation against these people who were invading our airspace. They could definitely say that. But I think it's something that if they really want this kind of union, that they're going to need to be careful about activities like that because it's not going to look good. In the meantime, the girls are in the other room, and Rose makes the comment, "Were aunts invited?" And Mrs. Putnam says, "Oh, this she's here at Lawrence's request." And then you see them talking to Rose about her pregnancy and how wonderful it is to have a child. One of the ladies said something about making sure that everything is okay genetically, insinuating Rose's disability. And I just found that so freaking tacky and so fucking rude. I know that's going to be a concern, especially in Gilead. They don't like stuff like that. Gilead wants to prop up themselves as this proper nation of all these people that are healthy and all of this crap. But to freaking center your attention on that freaking aspect of her, it's not necessary and it's rude. I don't know what I'm expecting of a Galadian wife, but sometimes, even if you're freaking a member of this oppressive regime and you're being complacent to allow its oppressive shit to continue, maybe put a face on like you have some fucking manners at some point. I did like that Rose chimed back that we should leave that in God's hands. After these two meetings of the minds with the women and the men are occurring individually, then the men come in and we get to see another awkward scenario, this time where Lawrence is showing off his ring because he is going to marry Mrs. Putnam. It was just so awkward. And I have questions about the whole thing, about how much faith or trust that Lawrence can have in Naomi. I don't know how she is going to be. And I don't know if she's going to be observant enough to pick up on some of the stuff that Lawrence does that will definitely look bad to a person that is all in for the Galadian regime. I don't know how open he'll be about that, but I don't think he's going to really be able to hide his intentions and his activities and stuff like that because he's never really tried to hide that stuff very much. Yeah, he puts his hand on her shoulders, shows his ring, and everybody looks just so awkward, especially Mrs. Putnam. And I feel for her in this situation, but I know that she doesn't really have a lot of better alternatives. Better being with Commander Lawrence, who is not going to be as likely to stick to all these ridiculous Galadian ceremonies and stuff than somebody else who might turn out to be a completely horrible creep. Of course, we have that last scene, which was really freaking horrible. You've had these disgruntled Canadians that have been getting more and more frustrated, and you've definitely seen them in the last couple episodes getting more and more animated and more angry and doing more and more protests, and the protests getting more and more vitriolic. I know that the show is trying to present this in a way that brings in some of the issues that we're having today, not just with America, but with the world. The world has had a problem lately of struggling with people being willing to elect these nationalists and allowing nationalists to drive the political discussions and drive the political direction. And it is contributing to massive division and dissent in several different countries throughout the world, but we're definitely feeling it here in America. And those of us that are not on the side of nationalists, I think we are getting very, very angry and frustrated. And we feel like nobody cares enough that they're really doing anything about it. We feel like I feel like, why aren't you fucking angry about this? Why aren't you doing everything in your power to try to stop this? I know that there are some reasons that people think that nationalism is a good thing. For me, I feel like the bad part of it is so bad that it washes away any of the good that people think that it might bring. I don't think isolating ourselves from other countries, I don't think screwing over our allies and breaking relationships with our allies, breaking promises with our allies is helpful. I think it really badly harms our own nation. But I think that these nationalists are seeing like one side of the issue, and that is making them blind to the realities of what happens when you become this isolationist, nationalist country who's just focused on themselves and not everybody else. They're really blind to what that looks like. And not because it's not there for them to see, they refuse to acknowledge it. Now, there is some conversation, I think, online about the likeliness of something like this occurring in Canada, the likeliness of these kinds of protests. The people that are in these protests, are they truly Canadian? Like, is this the kind of thing that Canada might do? The whole idea of a shooting in Canada, when Canada has very different laws when it comes to gun rights than we do in America. This is all legitimate commentary that we're trying to inject our US political issues and challenges into this situation in Canada that might not actually occur in a real life situation. But I do think that what you are talking about is, even if the situation that they've got going on in Canada on the show is supposed to run parallel to our time frame, and Canada has these very different laws than America does when it comes to gun rights. They have this very different outlook, I think, most of them, than some of the American nationalists and people upset about immigration and all of that. But you're also talking about a different scenario. You're talking about a scenario where back a decade earlier, we're taken over by Gilead. Gilead completely destroys our country, takes it over, makes it into this oppressive regime that is Gilead. Kills a lot of its people, pushes a lot of its people out, makes what was America just extremely oppressive. And anybody that gets out of there is stuck being a refugee somewhere else, unless you happen to be in Alaska or Hawaii. Everywhere else is either war torn or is another country that is giving us refuge. And in that scenario, after 10 years of this going on, if there was this massive plummeting of birth rates and increase in toxicity in the environment, an oppressive regime took over almost all of the USA, would Canada possibly implement different laws? Would the fact that they would have this massive influx of Americans coming over for refugee status to Canada, would that contribute to a change in their political ideas and their political thinking? Would it contribute to changes in their laws and stuff like that? No, American refugees aren't going to have rights to vote and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean they won't influence Canadian citizens. That doesn't mean that there won't be Canadian citizens that have American family members that are refugees that might be influencing that stuff. So we don't know if a situation like this really happened, and about 10 years down the road, after all of this stuff has been in place and all of this refugee stuff has been going on, we don't know if we would have like completely worn out our welcome by that point. And if some legal changes may have occurred to make gun laws a little bit different, to make the perspectives of the average Canadian a little different. And I don't think that these protesters are the average Canadians. I think it's being presented by the show as this is the extreme. Just like some of these nationalists in America, they're like the extreme end of some of the division that we see going on, and they're the ones out doing these protests, you know. And even if they're the extreme, it doesn't take a lot of extremists to make a lot of really awful freaking protests that can get very, very violent. Is the kind of situation they're showing on the show likely in Canada? Maybe not. But I do think we need to consider the reality that things are going to be different. They're going to change. They're not going to be the same as they are now. And there are conservatives in Canada that probably do feel like they don't want a bunch of American refugees coming over, or any other refugees for that matter. That even though Canadians overall, we see them as kind of a polite nation, that doesn't mean everybody is. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree. And so given that kind of desperate situation, and especially that long after Gilead took over America, is the refugee situation would it come to a boil like that? Would we be wearing out our welcome at that point enough that we piss off enough of them to contribute to something like that happening? Now, I don't know, but that's kind of how I would look at it, as to, even though I know they are trying to make a direct reflection off of nationalism that's occurring in the US and around the world, that there is this possibility that something like that could happen. And I'm pretty sure I already talked in the reaction about how frustrated I was with these protesters after these people sacrificed themselves to try to get children that had been kidnapped from their parents out of Gilead, which is a disgustingly oppressive regime. Kids that were in a wives' school where they're getting prepped to be married off in their preteen years and early teen years. And 3 planes worth of soldiers were shot down and killed dead because of this. And you're still going to like take your angry ass over to your protest and continue to protest them in the middle of a vigil specifically for those soldiers that died. And I just find that so freaking appalling. So freaking appalling. But it is a show. And so, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't take it so seriously. But the show freaking hits home in so many ways. And I was a soldier, so these are my people. I'm not in the army anymore. But I still care about the people that I was in the army with. I still care about the people that are still in the army. I still care about the freaking sacrifices that we made as soldiers, and that will continue to be made from other soldiers even while I'm not in the service anymore. So this definitely hit home. It was hard to watch. And I ended up watching that ending 3 times, y'all. And every single time it was so hard to watch. Now, if I could try to put myself outside of the whole shooting and just focus on the vigil and try to ignore all the freaking protesting that was going on. And this little girl has been asked to do the Pledge to Allegiance after her father just died. And she may not even know the Pledge of Allegiance, frankly, which could be part of the reason that she was struggling, but also she's freaking traumatized. Her dad just died. It was very cute to see her trying to do it. That is a way to try to drum up some public support. I'm just not sure about like the whole situation of putting that little girl on the spot like that after her dad just died. I was glad to see June get up there to help. Just saying that pledge is definitely something that kind of warms your heart, I think, in that kind of situation. I said in one of my videos, our country definitely has problems. We have a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean I don't love my country. I do love my country. I just want my country to do better. Learn from its mistakes, turn around, and improve on them, and don't make the same fucking mistakes again. To figure out what you're doing wrong and fix it. Make it freaking better. At least be trying. We should always be trying to step up. Even if it's little slow, gradual, teeny steps. We should always be trying to grow, to progress. That is why I'm a progressive. Because I believe humanity should be working towards progression. Not receding into some back past reality that we used to freaking deal with. Not that we're much better, we're not, but I do believe that each generation we do get a teeny little bit better. So that's all I'm gonna say about episode 9, Allegiance for Handmaid's Tale, but I do want to spend a little bit of time focusing on what might be coming up. Grand finale, episode 10. I believe it's called Safe. I'm assuming the idea of each of these people getting to a position where they're safe, or at least trying to. We have Serena, who just escaped from the Wheelers, and we don't know exactly where she is going to go to seek safety. Maybe June, maybe Tuello, maybe somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe she's going to try to seek help from the lady that drove off with her. There's no way for me to really know that, but I do know that Serena doesn't have legal status in Canada. She still could be facing the same situation that she did before, with possibly getting detained if she turns herself into any kind of government agency. But I think Tuello sympathizes with her for some reason, and he has this attraction to her, has some feelings for her. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if she goes to him, and he does have pull in the government. My biggest thoughts is she'll either go to Tuello or June. There is this little chance she could try to stick it out with this lady or get the lady to somehow help her. I remember one of the times that June tried to escape from Gilead and stuff didn't go as planned. And remember, she tried to get one of the people that was supposed to be driving her to help her, and he actually took her back to his house. Him and his wife end up dying, and his kid gets taken because of that. But they're not in Gilead, so there's at least that. She's not likely to have to face death because of going to the wrong person or face that person dying. But we don't know anything about this lady, and I don't know if that's the step that Serena would take. I would suspect that Serena is smart enough to know that like Mayday groups and stuff like that, some of these refugee places may not be willing to help her because of who she is, because of her involvement in Gilead, and because they know who she is. She is a known name. Even before Gilead existed, she was a known name. So I would think she would be wise enough to be very careful about who she goes to. Is she going to go to June? It's possible. she seems to think that June and her have this thing. I think that June and her have always worked well together, but Serena has caused so much turmoil in June's life, and June made it very clear that she's not forgiven, that this is for her kid and not for her. Um, that maybe Serena might not be comfortable going to her just yet. But then again, I don't know. Serena can be very crass, and she can be very dense when it comes to how she comes across to other people. So, so who knows? But anyway, enough about Serena. June, I think that shooting was geared at her. And it definitely looks like those guys were definitely directly saying that June needed to be targeted and taken out. I think Lawrence said he'd look into it, which to me, when he said it, sounded like an offhanded comment just to get them off his back. But he may go ahead and do that because he feels like June isn't serving a purpose to him now. And I think in some ways, June has definitely been a thorn in his side, has contributed to considerable amount of grief and pain, some of it of his own making, but still, because I don't think he has enough of a connection with June to feel like Nick does. Like Nick cares about her, so Nick doesn't want her dead or hurt. But Lawrence, I'm not so sure that he has any feelings like that for June at all. June makes him very aware of all the awful shit he's done. But for some people, that's not good. They don't like that. They don't want to be reminded of all the terrible crap they did, especially when they're trying to make amends. I don't care. I think people need to be calling him out on his shit. I do think, though, that June is in a very dangerous position. She is not safe, and she's going to have to look at safety. And because of the promos I watched, that definitely sounds like the direction that the next episode is going. Is that June's family, they've got to find a way to make it so they're all safe. And you hear her in the promo talk about that it's become too dangerous where they're at, that they are going to need to leave. And that sounds like she is pleading with Luke also to leave, not for New Bethlehem, but to get out of where they're at. Where are they going to go? I don't know. Is there a way for them to go to Alaska or Hawaii or something like that? I don't know. Is she going to vie to go to one of the Mayday fronts or a Chicago war front or something like that? I don't know. Like, June wants to get Hannah out, but June also needs to stay safe and needs to keep her family safe. So I think that's what it's going to be geared to. Now, the other thing that I saw in the promo that I definitely has me thinking, they showed Janine talking to Lydia that she was going to be posted again and that Lydia had promised that she would not be posted. But then they show that it appears that she is being posted in Laurence's household. And we know that for the most part, Lawrence tries very hard not to engage in the raping ceremonies that go on in Gilead. And I'm assuming he's going to try to carry that on as much as he can, as long as he's able to get away with it. Is Naomi going to be willing to put up with that? I don't know. Why they're insistent that they need another kid at this point, why Putnam was insistent that he needed another kid when they've already got one, I don't know. But maybe it's just to pump up that birth rate and say, hey, look, we're just pumping out more kids for these commanders, and that's resulting in a higher birth rate. Maybe, I don't know. To me, seeing these people having other women forced into making babies for them and then taking their babies from them when they already have one, to me is just so fucking, the whole thing is self-centered and selfish. But that's just like a whole nother level of selfishness. You already have a child that you're taking care of. You don't need another one. Just because you're a commander or a top functioning commander or whatever it is that you think you are, Doesn't mean you need another kid when you're forcing some other woman to have it for you and you are not allowing her to have access to that kid for the most part. Now, this will put Janine in a position where she will be able to be around her daughter. So I wonder how Naomi's going to react to that also. I think that whole scenario should be very interesting. But I suspect that it's probably, if Janine has to be posted, this is probably the best place for her to be posted right now. One of the other things they showed in the promo, Nick was talking to Mark about keeping June safe. That the Galadians are getting angry and they want June hurt. You know, they want her in a bad way. And he needs Mark Tuello to keep her safe. And then later on in the promo, it looks like they are taking Nick away. And it looks like Lawrence is very well aware of this. And Lawrence may have called for it, which is very disturbing. But it looks like something bad could happen with Nick. There have been people questioning on the internet if Rose might take Nick down, and God, I hope not. But I don't know enough about her to really know what her motives are or how she really feels or whatever. I would find it very odd for her as a pregnant woman in Gilead to try to have her husband taken out, because that would put her in a very precarious situation, especially with her being disabled and everything and her being pregnant. I think that would be a risk that that I would think she would not want to take. I don't know where these ideas are coming from. This could just be strictly fan theory based on no real information at all. But it still makes me wonder and think, because we don't know that much about her. We do know she knows some things, that she seemed to have been fairly supportive of what Nick was doing until he killed Putnam. And that I do feel like she reacted with a little bit of jealousy when she thought that him killing Putnam may have had something somehow to do with June, or with some other thing that maybe we don't know about but she knows about. Really would like to have more information about how much she knows and what side she takes on those things. That's all I've got for you. I will see you on season 5 episode 10, the grand finale, Safe, for Handmaid's Tale. See you then. Until next time, I'll see you when I see you. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you want more content, click subscribe. If you click that little bell and click all, then you'll get more content notifications.